Before we get into the video, I need you guys to do me a favour. Number 1, like the video. Also comment, let me know your thoughts on the case. The Noonan crime family were one of the most vicious and ruthless and unhinged crime families to ever come out of Manchester. Brothers Dominic, Desmond and Damian Noonan were the central characters in the Noonan crime organisation. However, there were 14 siblings, 14 of them, whose names all began with the letter D, a tribute to their Irish roots. Now, to say that the Noonan family were a platoon or a unit was an understatement. They were squadrons. While Desmond Noonan was considered a mountain of a man, a bear, ruthless and a political fixer of the Noonan crime family, after all, he beat an M charge when he allegedly shot Cheetham Hill gang member Anthony James Johnson, also known as White Tony, when he was ambushed in a car park of Penny Black Pub back in 1991. Desmond Noonan went on trial twice for it. The first time the case collapsed due to an alleged witness tampering. The second time he was acquitted. However, it was Dominic Noonan who was sinister, conniving and astute, and had a dark and dangerous appetite for boys. He was the person that wanted to be the central figure of folklore. Now, it was reported by Greater Manchester Police, Rick Mortimer, that he had witnessed Dominic Noonan walk hand in hand with a boy into a home when Dominic was put under surveillance. Now, police noted the person walking with the boy was in fact Dominic Noonan. It was confirmed. Now, it was reported that Dominic Noonan would ply boys with drink and then get them drunk before having his way with them. He would even pay the families cash or tell the boys never to repeat what happened. Now, it was suggested the police should intervene, but at the height of Dominic Noonan's power, police were careful not to rattle the Noonans. However, a senior officer is said to have replied with, "What we can't see, we don't know about." And this was one of the ways that Dominic Noonan could continue to grow his appetite when it concerned boys. Now, it was a known notion that Dominic was a gay man, something people would never say to his face, due to his urge for brutality. His family knew he was a predator, police knew he was a predator, and his rivals knew he was a predator, and his friends knew he was a predator. Born into an Irish family, the brothers started their crime spree by robbing drug dealers and homes in the Manchester area. Due to the Noonan family's reputation, they then began to rob post offices and security vans. That was their bread and butter. Dominic quickly acquired the name the Gay Gangster, and as the Gay Gangster, Dominic, along with Dessie, would disguise themselves by putting tights over their head and then ramming security vehicles in order to get it to stop after a cash pickup. Armed with guns, Dessie and Dominic would order the security to lay on the ground before taking the cash from the van. Now, it was reported that the Noonan family had stolen millions by doing so. I'm talking over £5 million plus. Now, during the 80s and 90s, the Noonan brothers began to work security at the Hacienda nightclub. Now, they were considered the hard men of Manchester at the time, when being a gangster afforded you the ability and the reputation and the superstardom of being a celebrity. The Noonan brothers also controlled the flow of drugs that entered the Manchester nightclub scene and would often take a cut of their profits. Now, because during the 80s and 90s clubs were filled with celebrities and other crime bosses alike, the Noonan brothers were called in to provide security in order to control other criminals. Though Dessie and Dominic were known for their violence and brutality, Dominic was more than capable of doing the same thing. On one occasion, Dominic Noonan had gone to a rival's patch, saw a dog outside the pub and then disconnected the head from the rest of its body, wrapped the head in a newspaper and then dumped it on a pool table. A very primary warning that even though he was the Gay Gangster and the spokesperson of the Noonan family, self-appointed of course, he was just as crazy. After the M of White Tony, the Noonan strength fortified, with over 40 convictions that included armed robbery, scrapping with the police officers, possession of gear and firearms, and a prison escape and fraud. Dominic Noonan's most costly crime would be him being convicted of being a predator concerning boys. In 2005, Dominic Noonan was jailed for just under 10 years after police pulled over his Jaguar in Greater Manchester. Now, when police searched the car, they found a revolver and ammo tucked away in the bonnet. Now, during his trial, Dominic Noonan told the jury that he was a man of God and asked for forgiveness. He even kissed the Bible in a show of respect in front of the whole jury. Now, Dominic Noonan was released on licence back in 2010. However, he was called back to prison almost immediately when the Manchester Evening News ran an editorial on the release of Dominic Noonan. Of course, he loved the limelight, he loved the spotlight, and he craved for it. He was the self-appointed spokesperson of the Noonan family. Now, Dominic was driving along Gorton Road when a woman cut him up. Now, Dominic crashed into the woman on purpose, got out of his car and then rolled a newspaper and tapped on the hood of her car, saying, "Do you know who I am?" Now, in order to antagonise the Greater Manchester Police, Dominic would even create a company called the GMP, which stood for Greater Manchester Postal. Again, Dominic Noonan was once again recalled back to jail after he was recorded speaking to people at the scene of the Manchester riots. And Dominic had a history of protests, dating back to his time in Strangeways Prison when he formed the Prisoners League Association, and that was back in 1990 while his two brothers were controlling the doors. Now, after Dessie turned into a drug addict and was stabbed by a drug dealer in 2005, and Damian Noonan had tragically died in a bike accident while on holiday in the Dominican Republic in 2004, he was only 37 years old. That left Dominic Noonan. Now, Dominic Noonan was jailed in 2018 after being found guilty of 13 separate offences against 4 different boys aged as young as 10. Now, when Dominic Noonan went to trial, his sordid escapades was put to the jury. It was alleged that Dominic committed the first offence when he was just 16 years old. The victim again was 10 years old, who lived in a Manchester care home. Now, Dominic Noonan had picked up the boy and guided him to a derelict house. Now, when Dominic was arrested, he told officers he had never met the boy before, had no idea who he was, and his accusations were a blatant lie. The second boy was a teenager, 17 years old. Now, he was taken into a car, then ganged upon at a home in northern Manchester before his clothes was taken. The third teenager says it happened in 2000s. Dominic Noonan had his way with him over 20 times. The teenager attended parties with Dominic Noonan and even was driving around together. Now, the chances of Dominic Noonan being alive after his sentences is slim, because first he has to finish the sentence for the arson, and then he has to do the sentence, of course, for the 13 historic offences. Now, according to other Manchester gangsters, they have washed their hands of Dominic Noonan. Without the backing of his two brothers, Damian and Dessie, the Noonan crime family had faded away from a lot of people's minds, and Dominic's downfall is he kept trying to use the reputation of his brothers and the past in order to intimidate and coerce people in order to get his own way. Again, this was a guy that loved the limelight. He was the self-proclaimed spokesperson of the Noonan crime family, and of course, he loved attention. Now he'll probably get that in jail, of course. Stay safe.